Hi, George. Could you hear us? Yeah?
Yes,
Okay.
can you hear me? You
Okay.
can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you very well.
Okay,
Thank you.
great, good. So if you can, just let me know when you're ready to start.
Okay, si quieres empezar a introducir el seminario. Okay. Okay, yeah, we're going to introduce the conference and then we start with you, okay?
Okay,
Okay,
good,
thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Now it's 9 o'clock in Central European time. It's 8 in Canary Islands, England, and Portugal. I'm talking to people who are watching us by the internet. Good morning, George. Good morning, everybody. It's a nice day. I know it's raining, it's windy, but it's a nice day. You are doing with us a nice day. So it's very nice to meet you. People know that they could listen to you by the channel we have in streaming. People know also they could ask and comment what you are saying now by Twitter. Our hashtag is ECOIC 2013, ECOIC, 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 okay, 2014, okay. And then you could comment, you could ask, you could also criticize if you want, okay. Then now I'm letting my colleague Valeria Levrato, who is presenting George. Please, Valeria.
Okay, hi everybody again. So that's a very special moment for us because George Siemens, Professor George Siemens is with us and we are very, very happy to stay with you. George had a personal problem, that's the reason because he's not in Madrid now. Nevertheless, we are sure that we will have a great Skype conference with him. And okay, George, thank you very much for that time. I'm just going to explain a little bit. George is going to make his speech, and after that we have some time for asking him some question or whatever. Okay, so thank you, George. We are ready. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I do apologize that I am not there in person. I would love to have spent the time in Madrid. I know you might have rain today, but we have a temperature right now that's around minus 30 Celsius. And we've had about 55 centimeters of snow over the last several days. So even if you have rain in Madrid, what we have here in Edmonton, where I am for the next, or have been for about last week, it's quite a bit worse, I think. I do want to also say thank you to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to address this group and address this conference. It's certainly a privilege to have time to engage with peers and colleagues around some of the important trends that are happening in the education landscape. Now, for the talk, what I'll do is I'll turn shortly to screen sharing, and you should see my slides come up on the screen, and then I will address what I think are some of the important areas impacting education around MOOCs. Now, MOOCs, as many of you are aware, have gained a lot of attention over the last several years. In the last probably 12 months or so, the attention that they've received has turned negative, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But I still think that MOOCs represent one of the most substantive trends educationally that we've faced as an industry. And I think they are giving us some interesting insight into where we're going, but also require us as educators to think deeply about what kind of an education system it is that we would like to have, and what kind of an education system we would like to have serving society. So with that as a quick introduction, I'm going to turn to screen sharing now. And if there are any questions that arise, then I will dive into a bit more detail on those once we get toward the end of the talk itself. So with the narrative around MOOCs, as I'm sure many of you are aware, and hopefully you should see this on your screen now, it looks like you are, the conversation really changed very fast. The popular narrative is that the real popularization of MOOCs started in 2011 with Stanford, when the initiative, course in artificial intelligence, was offered. And it gained a significant amount of attention. There was some activity with open education and open online courses prior to that, but that wasn't gaining the kind of public attention that we saw with MOOCs at systems like Stanford and eventually Harvard and MIT and so on. And so the conversation changed quickly at one point, and this was folks like Thomas Friedman and others in early 2013 were writing about how there's a revolution that has hit universities, and that revolution is going to change everything in terms of society, in terms of economics, and so on. Individuals like Clay Shirky, who is a fairly well-regarded and well-known commentator on the different ways in which technology is influencing education. Individuals such as Clay started addressing the impact that MOOC providers, such as Udacity in this case, were starting to do to the education sector what companies or organizations like Napster had done to the music industry. Now, after probably about a year and a bit of really significant hype, where it seemed like university presidents and the leaders of services like Coursera and Udacity and edX were taking conference stages trying to impress each other with bigger, bolder proclamations. There was a statement by Clayton Christensen, for example, where he said in the US, in the next 15 years, more than half the universities will be shut down. And individuals such as Sebastian Thrun were saying that in the future, there would be 10 universities and Udacity would be one of those. So there's some very big statements being made, and it really reflected some hype and some intoxication about the prospect of change. Now, there was an article that came out recently, early this year, actually, I believe it was, where Sebastian Thrun basically did an article or an interview and stated, Udacity, we have a lousy product. And this changed from literally a year and a half ago. In a segment of 18 months, we went from the plateau and the pinnacle of systemic change, a new and different future, to basically the lead of one of these organizations declaring that their product is lousy. So it's an interesting trajectory. It just goes to show how much the original conversation of MOOCs, once they were popularized, became about hype and not so much about the learning experience, which individuals in distance and online education have looked at for years. The trajectory that this developed was almost like watching a disease spread globally. We went from having really nothing much happening with MOOCs to a very short timeline, having many of the most significant regions of the world either offering a MOOC or having their own MOOC provider, in the case of a number of countries and regions, to now, in the last 6 to 12 months, a growing number of regions signing national partnerships that are being led either by government agencies or otherwise that are trying to promote the adoption or the use of MOOCs. And it's now at a stage where an individual who is interested in learning almost any topic has a range of courses to choose from. There are literally hundreds, thousands of open online courses that are being offered from top international universities. And at any given month, an individual can start just a range of courses or learning opportunities that cover the breadth of what you would be able to take if you were a traditional university student. Put it into perspective, we now have MOOCs reaching around 15 million learners. Of those, about 9 to 10 million are with Coursera, about 4 to 5 million are with edX, and the balance would be with a range of smaller MOOC providers in a range of different universities or countries. There have been hundreds of millions of dollars invested in MOOCs, MOOC platforms, and MOOC development. Thousands, even tens of thousands of academics have been involved, and this has resulted in an enormous amount of mainstream media exposure. Top newspapers, radio, TV stations, websites have covered MOOCs, and it's resulted additionally in a lot of on-campus soul searching, where faculty, administrators, and others are wondering, what is this? What does this mean for us in the long run? And how can we, as a university system, take advantage of the public attention that's being paid to education, but at the same time still continue to serve the role that MOOCs or that universities have in society, which is as a transformational agent. Now, this basically is a quick overview of the MOOC trajectory. Now, this likely won't render well on your screen, but I'll just briefly point out a few little clusters here. But first of all, it's important to note that systems such as UNED and others, Athabasca University in Canada, Open University in UK, have a long history of innovating with teaching and learning. So this is not a new type of thing for these systems. And it's worth recognizing that the idea of MOOCs is significant in distance education systems. This idea of learning for non-traditional members of society, easy access, open access to learning experiences, as well as recognition of the role that technology can play in a good learning experience that happens where there's a separation geographically between the teacher and the student. So in many ways, distance education is very well suited, and traditional distance and online education is the root, or could be seen as a parent for what we have with MOOCs. Now, admittedly, the big trajectory or the big transition that MOOCs have provided is that they've moved the conversation of learning and online learning from initiatives that are done by Open University or distance education systems to work that's being done by the top and the leading universities in the world. So instead of being, let's say, systems such as UNED or Open University or Athabasca, we find that Stanford and MIT and Harvard and Princeton and Oxford and other systems are part of that conversation now. They're investing heavily in distance and online learning and digital learning technology. So what this, I think, really says in a lot of ways is that we can start to realize that MOOCs are important for doing two big things. One, they've given us a language that allows us to move the discussion of learning outside of academic circles and into the public sphere. I've had conversations about MOOCs with taxi drivers, with business folks that are sitting in a seat beside me in an airplane, with random family members, friends, and so on. So in the past, the idea of university learning was something that was part of just getting a degree. So it might be a sequential learner, you finish your primary, secondary schooling, and then you get a degree to enter into the workforce. Or it might be someone who already has a degree, reskills, and then goes back into the workforce. Now we're finding that the idea of lifelong learning is a reality. It's something that's been talked about for decades, but it's a reality now, and people are talking about the importance of continual and ongoing learning. A second important thing that MOOCs have done, and I'm going to spend much of the rest of my talk looking at this, is they've raised awareness of how higher education is today mismatched for the general structure of our society. and that in many ways, distance systems and online learning systems and digital learning systems are going to become more and more important as learning moves from being an activity that we do for 4 years to get a job to an activity that we do for the balance of our lives in order to continue to remain relevant when we have rapid systemic changes happening in all sectors of society. And so then MOOCs matter very broadly then for 4 significant reasons. And these are attributes that I'll talk about starting with the next couple slides. First of all, MOOCs are relevant because the economy has changed. And that's a really important point that I don't think we hear about enough, but I'll dive into shortly. MOOCs are also relevant because learning needs have changed. It's a different type of learning experience that we have, or that our kids will have, than what we had when we were entering our careers. This also reflects the term I use is it's a complexification of society's learning needs. Namely, a single narrative doesn't work anymore. Learning plays many, many different roles, and it means that universities have to become more multifaceted than they already are. And then the fourth point, MOOCs matter because the structure of knowledge has changed. And an argument that I've been making for years is that if you want to understand the future of society, you have to understand the structure and the architecture of knowledge in the world today. And that'll provide us with some guidance or some ways to understand what the future of society will look like. Okay, so now I'm going to talk or move into a series of 4 points that I'll spend the bulk of my my session on, and that is the current trends, something I'm going to call latency. Then I'll talk about the university broadly and the future of MOOCs. So let's start with the first point. So the first point I want to look at trends, and there's a range of trends, economic and other, that I'd like to address. The economic structure of society is changing quite significantly, and this has some very substantial implications for all of us, because it means that many of the jobs that we have seen done in society, whether it's through our parents or whether it's through family members or friends or otherwise, but many of these jobs are disappearing. And by disappearing, I'm referring specifically to the fact that they're becoming obsolete because they're being done through automated ways. One illustration I heard recently was in the US, the millions of truck drivers, people who drive lorries and semi-trucks, that these individuals will see within potentially as soon as 5 years, maybe as long as a decade, will see their jobs essentially disappear as automated technologies can drive more safely than human beings can. And so that means that the jobs are changing. But more relevant, it's not just that the jobs are being automated, but that there are new types of work available. And this is often defined as knowledge work, meaning that more members of society are involved in knowledge-related activities than are involved in physical or routine labor. So this one illustration from McKinsey just describes that in developed economies, such as the US and European regions, less than a third of the economy is now production-related work. Most of the work is either in creative or knowledge work or in the service sector. And that means that in those fields, both service, knowledge, and service sectors could be, let's say, working in the banking industry or working in retail. But in those areas, the skills needed of individuals change quickly. So let's say you work on a computer and IT support desk. The pace of technology change is so rapid that you need to continually be involved in learning and learning-related activities in order to stay current. Now, just give you a quick image or a visualization of what this looks like. So this is obviously a map or an image of the US, and this highlights the major industries in terms of employment by different states. And in 1990, the blue that you see here, those are manufacturing jobs, so traditional manufacturing work. The red that you see is retail trade. There's the purple here that looks at accommodation and food services, but that's really the structure of the economy. So it's still heavily manufacturing based. And this image is really, we're looking at an image that's 25 years ago, what the economy looked like. If you look at that economy in 2013, you'll see that it's a completely different type of economic system. In most states now, the orange that you see on the screen reflects healthcare and social work or social assistance work. There are still a few states that still have lead in manufacturing by employment, and a couple still with retail. This just reflects, though, the argument that I'm trying to present here is that the nature of employment is changing because the nature of the economy is changing, and that has some relevant implications for the education sector. The next point to focus on is that the profile of students are changing. We have a different type of student from what we've had in the past, and that's quite critical because in many ways, UNED and open universities or distance education systems have always served the non-traditional student base better than existing universities have, like the traditional brick and mortar universities in many ways. So with the student profile now in the US, just giving as an example, less than 50% of the students are now full-time, which is quite a significant change because in the past, obviously, the traditional university was focused on serving students that were moving from high school and directly into university. According to OECD, the new or the emerging student profile favors women over men. As a percentage of learners in society, it's now up to 60% of the students or members of society are pursuing a post-secondary degree. They're entering the education sector at a later age than they ever have. And there's greater involvement from international students. And in many countries of the world, such as, let's say, the US as an illustration, the racial profile of universities is also changing. So in the US, in 2014 was the first time that the white student population dropped to less than 50% of society, and meaning that the growing diversification of the student population by race is another changing demographic of society. In terms of the learning experience, in addition to obviously the economy and the different student profile, the learning experience now is such that it has, or at least it's starting to become more granular, meaning that we're not focused necessarily as much as we were in the past, at least, on the full degree model, meaning that there are many ways to get a degree. Taking courses is only one. There are a range of other opportunities, and we're starting to see students become selective in what they do and where they go with learning. And what I mean with that is a student may still take a traditional degree program in a university, but they'll start to take on a range of other learning opportunities, if you will, through personal or self-regulated learning. Recently spoke with a provost of a major state university in the US, and he was saying that one of the interesting things they're starting to see is that 30 to 40% of their students are taking courses with other universities or colleges rather than within their own university. This is, for them, was quite surprising. They weren't aware of how significant it was, but it reflects the student opportunities for choice, meaning that a student today doesn't have to take the courses that we offer at our universities exclusively. They can take on a range of learning needs and opportunities through a range of different systems. With that, something that's still very much a young trend. It's not something that I would say is pronounced yet, but we're also seeing alternative credentialing approaches or different ways of assessing students. And badges are one of these ways. There's some pressure to change the course credit hour. Systems like Arizona State University, just as an example, have already taken this approach where they'll do semester A and semester B, meaning that instead of running a full length, you'll have 7 or 7.5 weeks or of course time in 2 separate blocks, so that there's sort of a break and you're starting to make the overall learning experience more granular. Another dramatic trend, and this certainly won't show up on your screen clearly, but it was a recent report from the National Center of Education Statistics by the U.S. Department of Education, and it just indicated the growing percentage of students that are enrolled in distance education in the U.S. We're seeing 2 to 3 million students that are involved exclusively in distance learning, and a growing number of individuals that are entering into that space. And interestingly, that's also increasing with undergraduate education. Graduate students, because the nature of graduate programming, have typically been higher. Up to a quarter of student population at the graduate level works with online learning. But now we're seeing the undergraduate level, which has historically been confined to on-campus instruction, at least in the US, is now growing in online and distance opportunities as well. So not only is the employment and the student profile and the nature of course taking practices changing, a growing portion of this is happening in digital learning or digital environments. And that returns back to the point that I mentioned earlier, is that we're seeing a complexification of higher education, that a single narrative or a simple narrative of what a university isn't sufficient, and that this idea of a university is expanding and diversifying quickly. Now, here's where things become a bit more complicated, is that even now, many of the existing MOOCs don't reflect a dramatic pedagogical leap. In fact, I would say in some cases, the teaching and learning approaches of universities actually reflect a little bit of a regression or a bit of a pushback from the things that we know work well. Let me explain what I mean with that on this next diagram. So you'll see 4 quadrants on your screen, and I'll describe these as important activities that learners engage in on a regular basis. So on the top left here, you'll see daily sense making. This is the kind of learning that we just do on an ongoing basis. It's what helps us to be successful in our personal lives. It might be things like we learn how to speak another language, or we learn how to raise children, or we learn how to manage finances, or whatever. There's just daily things that we engage in. Then if you drop down, you have this idea of mapping to existing knowledge. This is structured learning, and this reflects formal courses in a university. This is where we're trying to get a degree that reflects our mastery of a particular domain. Moving over to your bottom right, you'll see new knowledge, and this is research and scientific activity. And then moving up from there, you have crisis activity. This is such as in 2008 would be an example, where there's a significant issue that occurs, and we as a society have to make sense of it. Right now with Ebola, that's something that we're experiencing societally, where we're trying to learn as a society and researchers and others what it is and what it means. Now, the existing educational practices address the quadrants on the left, meaning how to make sense of the world and how to map to existing knowledge, whereas the future of work is really in new knowledge generation and coping in increasingly complex settings, where we're almost moving from one crisis to another crisis. And MOOCs currently address more the former approach, namely that they address mapping to existing knowledge rather than preparing people to be new knowledge creators or individuals that are generating through social connectedness and other approaches new types of information and knowledge. Okay, this next section I'll briefly talk about. It'll vary in terms of the relevance that it has for different university systems. But one of the attributes that's changed is in many areas, there's a few exceptions. Places like Germany and some of the Scandinavian or the Nordic countries are different. But there is a growing reliance on established university systems to look for tuition revenue. And generally, this is referring to, in the past, where the government systems would fund the universities reasonably well. Governments have pulled back from their funding, and as a result of that pullback, have placed greater emphasis on university survival, if you will, on universities raising tuition fees. And so you get what has become a revenue vice, certainly in the US, starting to become one in the UK, and I suspect in places like Australia and other regions, even in Canada, is that we have declining support from the government, and yet we can't raise the tuition to fill that gap because we're seeing a decline in enrollment because there's a greater number of university competitors. And so we're caught in this place where the government is providing less funding, and yet we don't have the ability to make up for that diminished funding through tuition increases because there's more competition and more options available for students. And so even in some cases, at least in the US, some smaller systems are finding that class sizes and student enrollment numbers are changing, and universities are struggling with new approaches or new ways to continue to work without having a dramatic change in tuition, which will drive away a lot of their students. So this diagram just basically says, or basically addresses the ability of different universities to raise tuition. So in the past, there was greater flexibility in tuition. And if you look now at the bottom or the right-hand side of the blue and the reddish on the bottom, meaning that these are systems now that are actually starting to see a decrease in enrollment, or not a decrease in enrollment, a decrease in tuition raises because they simply can't make those kinds of changes without losing more and more of their student population because more choices are available. So that's the trends. Now, the balance of these I'll move through a little bit quicker, and then in about 15 minutes, I'll stop for questions. So I want to talk about an interesting idea that I think we're seeing reflected in a number of companies and organizations, but we're not yet seeing reflected in the university. And it's this idea of latency. So if we look at what do systems like Airbnb, which is a service where if you have a home or an apartment, you can use this to rent a spare room, or if you're traveling, you can rent it out to people who come by to visit. Or a service like Uber, which is just an app on your phone. There's a lot of controversy with this. I know certain cities in Canada are fighting with Uber, and in the US, and I know in European regions as well. But it's basically an app on your phone, and it allows somebody to pick up other individuals, give them a ride, and it's, for lack of a better word, an opportunity for anyone to earn a few dollars with their vehicle. And so with both Airbnb and with Uber, we have this idea of a system that has latency. And by latency, I mean it's potential in a system that's not being used. So if you have a house, but you're traveling for 2 months of the year, then your house is empty, it's not being used. But if you can rent that out to someone else through a system like Airbnb, then you can generate revenue and you take advantage of the latent capacity of that facility. Or let's say you're an individual who has a car, but you don't use it all the time because when you're at home, it's not being used, or it's sitting in your driveway or in the back alley or whatever. With an initiative or a tool like Uber, you have the ability to take those latent capabilities of your system, your university or your vehicle, I should say, and use that as a way to make it more productive. Now, there's other things that have similarly activated latent capacity. So again, I just want to emphasize latent capacity is the unused elements of a system. So if you look at Flickr was one of those examples that allowed us to do work with the images that many of us had on our cameras or hard drives. And suddenly with Flickr, there was an easy way to share it with others rather than having them physically there looking at our camera screen or looking at our computer. And so it enabled the ability for us to share those images. So the images weren't being shared, which was the latency of those images, and suddenly we could share them. The same thing with things like Blogger, where we had an easy ability to connect people and people's ideas, and that's since launched, blogging and in many ways different types of social media. But that was essentially the model that we're looking at with this particular tool set at that stage. Other examples, such as the SETI at home, which is taking advantage of latent computational capacity of the computers all of us have, and then using that as a way to conduct or to be engaged in scientific research. Other initiatives, whether these are things like Occupy Wall Street or Arab Spring or other activities, these are essentially using the tools and technologies that we have at our disposal today to activate the capacity of social systems or of individuals. Now, this is something that I think is quite critical for the education system. And I'll just share a quick example of what I mean with why this is important. I'll call this the 100 people in a room theory of knowledge. So if we have, most classrooms today at least, are structured so that if you're teaching, you have 20 or 30 or 50 or even more students that are essentially not contributing. They're learning what you're telling them, but it's a very poor system. There's a high level of knowledge latency in that classroom. And the reason is, if you put 100 people in a room, because all of us know different things and we've had different life experiences, if you ask us or any individual to share what they know, we can teach each other a lot. We might have somebody who is terrific at statistics, somebody who understands psychology well, or mathematics, or pick a topic, physics, and the list goes on. There's the knowledge capacity in that room is latent, but it's not activated by the current university system. The current university system is structured to have the faculty member or the teacher share, but not the rest of the class share. And so my argument is that we need a system, a structure, and MOOCs hopefully can be part of that, but that will allow university teaching and learning activities to not be based only on the faculty member, but instead to be based on individuals communicating and sharing with one another, so that the room of people properly connected can become much more intelligent than what we currently see within the university system. So it's really about trying to get into this power of integration, where we pull together these various levels of expertise and knowledge and don't rely exclusively on the faculty member to generate and drive that knowledge discussion. All right, some thoughts on the university then. The university right now is a well-connected and integrated structure. And that's an important element, is it's an integrated structure end to end. In a lot of cases, it's different in different parts of the world, but largely speaking, universities will control everything from the point of enrollment up until the point of degree granting. And universities going forward, at least at this stage, appear to be moving from an integrated system to an ecosystem. And in an ecosystem, there are a growing number of different providers that are contributing to what the university is. Quite often, those are for-profit providers, but it does reflect a change or a different model of the university. And so the university that we have today, this connected and integrative structure, has been hardened to preserve serving the student well, to achieve that particular task. This works great if things are stable. Once there's a lot of change, and that change can be economic and demographic, some of the topics that I addressed earlier, once those kinds of change elements become more prominent, then that existing hardened structure, that set process of doing things, starts to become actually quite challenging for universities in terms of survivability. And so then we have a power shift that's essentially going on, where we're seeing state and public universities starting to see a larger number of companies starting, faculty, and these companies are ed tech startups quite often that are serving a particular role in this ecosystem. There are a number of new entrants, often driven by venture capital. And in this process, faculty are losing control, or at least fear that they are. And learners, in some cases, appear to be gaining some additional control over their learning. But essentially, at the heart of this, it's a power shift. And as a result, there's also a greater transition to society, or to the university model, I should say, becoming more corporate. And in this process of becoming more corporate, we see even now in universities, we do need business-like processes for managing IT and for how we function as a system. But that perspective has grown more and more pronounced in many organizations and in a number of systems, state and provincial. The term is administrative bloat, meaning that there has been such a significant investment in increasing the administrative and business capacity of a university that has far outstripped the growth and investment in faculty as universities have become more corporate involved. We're also seeing that for the purposes of the core role of a university, that there may be some significant changes coming as well. There was a recent MIT report that looked at the future of education at their university. And one of the things that they were grappling with as a system is, maybe we've come to the point where the whole idea of a class is actually outdated, that we need to start looking at different ways of serving students, and that this is really a process of unbundling, where the classroom, the way that we've seen it in the past, is starting to be pulled apart in a range of different directions. And it's not just the university serving students anymore. Those students could be taking courses from a range of different providers could be taking a MOOC from another university, could be taking an online course from a for-profit provider, and so on. So it presents a very different structure, and it means that the core activity of a university, at least as driven by MOOCs, seem to be experiencing some significant change. And the idea of a class is something that we maybe need to rethink, and that there needs to be a different approach or ways in which to interact with each other as students and as faculty members. Now, for the final 5 or 6 slides, I want to talk a little bit about the ways in which I think universities will change and the ways in which MOOCs contribute to some of that change. So probably most important to note, and I suspect most people in this room are aware of this isn't as much of a surprise as it was about a year ago when MOOCs were still thought to be such a hugely consequential trend. And I do think they're very significant. I just think they were overhyped. But this general idea to focus on then is that MOOCs aren't the trend. They're not the important thing. MOOCs instead are a reflection of the broader changes in society. And more importantly, MOOCs represent, I argue, that transition that we see going on from universities being physical or even distance-based to universities that are now digital and that are giving students a greater degree of control, that reflect an unbundling of the traditional approach of the university. And so MOOCs, the big contribution that they provided for us, I think, as educators, is an opportunity to think differently about what we're doing in education, and also for us to start to have a voice for if we could remake higher education, if we could turn universities into something new and different, what would that look like and what would that be? And one of the things a lot of MOOCs, and this gets back to a slide I shared earlier, that MOOCs are really reflecting the change that's happening in society as a whole, that the existing education system has served stable knowledge, the duplicating, providing degrees. It hasn't done as good of a job, at least certainly at an undergraduate level, as helping individuals start to become knowledge flexible, meaning that they can quickly and rapidly adjust and adapt to new contexts or new opportunities. So a few of the projects, and this is based on a MOOC that we're currently running, a few of the projects that we've been trying to look at is how can you make the MOOC process more self-organizing on the part of learners and more adaptive on the part of learners, so that students who take a course online or a MOOC can get better help support, can have a socially embedded learning experience where they're connecting with peers. It's self-organized. How can we help students be more successful in MOOCs? I'm personally not concerned about dropout rates in open online courses, because I think in many instances, that's the wrong question. It really doesn't matter in terms of dropouts in a lot of cases, because students didn't have any expectation or even any interest in finishing. But if students want to finish, how do we give them that kind of support? And another point that we're going to see, I believe, more and more, and this relates to this idea of personal and adaptive learning. And it also goes back to the point I just raised about MIT's discussion about the end of the class, or that the classroom of the future may be something completely different. So getting back to this idea that all of us have a different type of knowledge. We all know different things. So the 100 persons in a room theory of knowledge. In that kind of a setting, if there are 50 of us taking a course, all 50 of us have to take the same amount of content and the same sequence of content in an existing university classroom. In the future, I think it'll be very different. I think in the future, we're going to see individuals taking courses or content elements that are relevant to them, but it'll be based on what they know, meaning that everyone, if you have 50 people in a course, all 50 people will have a different type of course instruction so that the course adapts to the student. The content flow and the learning activities are adaptive and reflective of the student. That's a reflection not just of MOOCs, that's a reflection of the investment that has gone on in numerous university school systems, even some secondary school systems that are starting to work with adaptive or personalized learning. And that essentially states that if you have 30 people in a classroom, all 30 of those should have their own course that's reflective of the knowledge that they currently have. And this is an important element for us to think about as we look at the nature of knowledge. How is knowledge created in a society today? That's really the lens that we should use to look at the future of higher education. So today, knowledge is socially driven, network created, it's interactive, it's collaborative, it's publicly vetted, it's open, it's online, and those are the same attributes that the university of the future will need to have. Now, sort of moving to a conclusion here over the next 4 slides, I just want to look at what I think reflects what's the future potential of universities and the role that they play in society. So if you look at 3 elements of a university process, at least related to teaching, research is obviously different, but if you look at the top left, we have content, curriculum, and teaching. On the bottom, we have assessment, and then we obviously have the learner on the right. Traditionally, we used to make money, if that's the right word to use, or monetize the teaching, learning, and the assessment end. That's where the university was based on, through content, through teaching and assessment. Since late 90s, early 2000s, curriculum and content has increasingly become free. So initiatives like MIT's OpenCourseWare and others provide a huge amount of curriculum publicly available without charge. MOOCs then have made teaching largely free because you can take an existing course through a major provider such as edX, and you'll have the ability to learn from often some of the best instructors in the world. For us then, the big question becomes, if we have free content and free teaching, then what role does a university play in society? What are we charging tuition for? Or what are governments investing in us if there's so much of this opportunity that's free? And so I'll say that there's a number of things or an interesting opportunity that we're presented with, so that if something is easy to duplicate, because basically the internet is in many ways just a massive duplicating machine where it allows us very inexpensively to duplicate and improve and expand on a number of things that others have created or generated. And if somebody writes a blog post, we can link to it and update it. Now, the interest of memes, if you follow sites like Reddit or other social communities online, it's an easy way for us to take something someone else has done, tweak it, improve it, and share it forward. The difficulty is that if something can be easily duplicated, you can't make money from it. That easy duplication means that if we're going to charge $1,500 a semester for a student to take a course that they can get the content and the teaching materials online for free, then we're going to have a hard time justifying why this is a good investment for the student. So I'm going to argue a few things here and excuse the complexity of this slide. I'll try and talk through it a little bit, but so in the red, you'll see that, curriculum and teaching, assessment, and so on, these are things that we've monetized in the past. So in the past, we would charge students for tuition so we could teach them. we would charge them to assess them. Going forward, though, we see that students can take a number of learning or engage a number of learning activities. They can take MOOCs, they can be involved in workplace learning, personal learning, or informal learning. And each learner in this process develops a personal knowledge graph, if you will, which means that we're all learning constantly, so that when I go to a university, or when a member in the audience goes to a university, we've all developed a personal graph of knowledge. When we get to that university, the university, instead of just teaching us all the same way, should identify what I know and what each of you know, and then they should provide personalized content to those knowledge gaps. Meaning, if I want to become a nurse, I need to have certain types of knowledge elements. If I want to become a doctor, I need to have other types of knowledge. So what university's role then is to understand, what does George know? And then what is needed in a curriculum area, and then fill that knowledge gap with instruction. And then finally, another role, I should say, that the university plays, in addition to filling those knowledge gaps, is it's the assessment of what they know. So if I've learned something through MOOCs or through workplace learning or personal learning, then the role of a university needs to be to make sure that they provide proof that I know it. So that there's a rigorous process of validating that when I took that MOOC, I actually learned, rather than just taking that course. And so there has to be a process of assessment and validation of learning. So in some ways, it looks a little bit like this. So on the left, you'll see a learner knowledge. This is what I've learned through my learning or engagement in formal and informal learning. This is the architecture of knowledge in a discipline. So in order to be a nurse, you have to know these things. A university's role then is to understand, what does a learner know, and to articulate what is needed in order to be a nurse, and then fill that gap so that that learner can get that degree. And that gap might be filled through MOOCs, online courses, or a range of other activities. And ultimately, the university then provides the quality stamp of credentialing in the form of assessment after they've filled those types of knowledge gaps. So on that note, I'll just mention our upcoming Learning Analytics Conference held just outside of New York next March. And I will now stop screen sharing and turn my video on again. So I will now pause for questions.
Thank you very much, George. Now, I think there is no questions. I think there are a lot of questions. Then the problem will be how many we could now answer or discuss. But as you know, this is a very warm topic, and we have a lot of people there with us sharing your talk, and also by the internet. We know by the tweets that there are a lot of people who are watching us. So please, questions. They are thinking the questions there is one there on the left, here, ahí a la izquierda.
Good morning, thank you. Important pregunta. Uber and Air, for example, it is a possible good idea technological. However, what is the mock to the taxi driver to adaptive and new technologies environment?
Okay. I didn't quite hear the question. It was a little bit of quite a bit of background echo, but was it related to the driver of new technology development?
I think I have to repeat the question.
The situation of taxi driver in relations with the problem Uber or Air.
But I think I have to repeat the question to you, because you You don't listen to directly our room, okay?
Okay.
So a colleague is asking about the problem of adaptive tools and adaptive environments we are using. Is it okay?
Yeah.
What's your opinion?
Yeah. So first of all, you're 100% right. That there is a big problem with adaptive tools or adaptive technologies. They're not well developed yet. One of the things that I find most frustrating about it is that it's not universities driving it. Most of the activity happening with adaptive learning is actually happening with corporate providers that are serving the university marketplace. And so the software that we're using to create adaptive learning is not something that's internally generated. And my concern with it is that we give away part of our control as a university in society when we don't have ownership of our own technologies for immersive or adaptive or personalized learning. So essentially, this is the short version. Obviously, all of the difficulty is in doing the work itself. But the big idea is that we do two things in order to get to adaptive learning. One, we have to know what is the content in a knowledge domain. And I'll just bring this, well, actually, I'm not sharing right now, so I won't bring the slide. But what is it, in order to be a nurse, what do you have to be able to do, and what do you have to know, and what are the affective elements? Like, what kind of person do you have to be in order to be a nurse? So that's the first thing. You need to know what's the content. Now, universities have done that very well. That's, in fact, much of what we've done for hundreds of years. We look at what does it mean to be a physicist or a chemist or a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer and or an engineer or a computer scientist. So we do that quite well. What we need to do, though, now, in addition to that, is we need to start defining, and I've used the word a personal knowledge graph, but it's this image of what does each student know? What does a person know? And then we compare what the knowledge is in a discipline with what a person knows, and then we fill that gap with instruction and or with additional learning opportunities for students. So it doesn't have to be direct instruction, it could be self-organized learning on the part of students. So, but those technologies are, and the models are quite rudimentary still, they're quite basic, but there are a growing number of organizations, companies that are starting to pay attention to this area. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, one of their big post-secondary investment strategies is in this area. It's in personalized learning. And so I think over the next probably 4 or 5 years, we're going to see an explosion in companies in adaptive learning and an explosion in the attention that adaptive learning has to the university sector. The difficulty, though, is that, for me, my concern is that we don't own that process if we're not building it ourselves, and that's worrying.
Thank you very much. That's right. Thank you. Other questions?
Okay, good morning, and thank you for your interesting chat. My question is about MOOCs. You talked about the 100 people theory, and the question is, do you think if you get the credential, the MOOC credential, without interact with people, do you think the MOOC, this MOOC is successful, could be successful?
Okay. Have you listened to?
Yeah, I think.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think I heard the question. It was around with MOOCs and sort of getting latent capacity. Was that sort of the question related to the ability of learners and MOOCs to make that more effective, or did I misunderstand that?
Yes. A colleague is asking about the problem of assessment, accreditation, and interaction with people. Do you think without interaction it's possible to really to assess people in MOOCs?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, the distance education research certainly demonstrates the benefits that exist in just giving students or people access to learning. And so having someone have the ability to get a hold of resources, reading materials and otherwise, students can learn. And even Nelson Mandela, for example, did his law degree at through distance education with not a lot of interaction. I mean, the interaction was with a text. I have a colleague from Athabasca University. He has a statement. He calls it the equivalency theorem of interaction. And so his statement is that you have three kinds of interaction. You have student content, student-student, and student-teacher. And his view is that if any two of those are at a high enough level of quality, then you don't need the third. So if you have really strong student to good quality educational content interaction or really strong student to teacher interaction, then you might not need student-student interaction. Or on the flip side, if you have strong student-student interaction as well as student content interaction, then you might not need the teacher and student interaction. So I think some of those things are true, are going to be true in MOOCs as well, especially as the content starts to become a little more adaptive or a little more intelligent, if you will. And that, I think, provides us with really a good opportunity educationally to think about what is it that we're doing, or what do we need to be doing that we're not yet doing, in providing a more interactive experience. In a perfect world, I think interaction with peers is critical to knowledge development. But sometimes we may have a student at a distance, might be in a different time zone, that doesn't enable them to engage in collaborative learning, or it might just be cultural or language barrier distinctions. So interaction, I would say, would be preferable with peers wherever possible, but I do think that you can still have really good learning experience without that level of interaction.
Thank you very much. Next question, there.
Hi, George. Thank you very much for your talk. I would like to ask you, you explained something about regression. You said that some MOOCs are having, that we are having some regression with some MOOCs. And you said that it's especially for the pedagogy theory. So could you please explain it a little bit more? And which is for you the best pedagogy theory that we would have in the MOOC?
Which is the best pedagogy as you see it for the MOOC?
Okay. Well, this is one of the difficulties or opportunities, perhaps. As I mentioned earlier, right at the start, where I talked about how we're seeing a complexification of the university, that there are a growing number of students that we're serving and a larger number of needs that the university serves in society. And so as a result of these changes, it's sometimes difficult to say what is the best aspect without first looking, or the best pedagogy, I should say, without first looking at the specific context in which that's occurring. So personally, I would say it would be most appropriate for students to be doing a few things as they're involved in learning. They need to be actively communicating what they know to others through discussion and interaction. They need to be actively creating artifacts that they then share with others, that others can then use and build on. They need to be actively focused on integrating and connecting parts, the knowledge elements of the course, to create a deeper understanding of the topic, rather than just being able to repeat back to a faculty member what they know on a test. They should be able to create things with that new knowledge as well. And so in that regard, I would say any pedagogy that requires active engagement active creation, focused reflection would be a good pedagogy to use in a MOOC. But the current, just give you an example. So I'm teaching a MOOC right now with colleagues on the edX platform. It's data analytics and learning. And one of the interesting things I've found with this, so we have a heavy emphasis right from the start of the course that students need to create content, they need to be engaged in interacting with each other. We don't want them to just repeat back to us what we know. We want them to write blog posts and create images and so on. And yet what we found was that students push back at that. So even though most educators, I think, who've been teaching for a while know the value of immersive and interactive learning, students don't appreciate it always. And we actually had a lot of pushback over the first 2-3 weeks of the course where students were not wanting to engage actively. So there's a difficulty in that I think you need an immersive, interactive pedagogy in a MOOC. But the difficulty is that a lot of students have been conditioned to expect the teacher to give them the answers rather than for the student to become more active and more involved.
Thank you very much. I think there is another question there.
Okay.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I'm also from UNED University. I would like to ask you about using the project-based learning within the MOOCs. Because if we're talking about massive learning, I guess sometimes it is very necessary to have more tutoring. So if you're talking about a lot of students, I wonder how this methodology can cope with and also for the grading, how do you evaluate the students' acquisition of knowledge in this case?
It's a colleague, she's a colleague from the distance university also, and she's asking about assessment and in project-based learning and your opinion, your data about it.
Yeah, that's such a big question right now. In fact, I think in many ways, one of the big concerns about MOOCs right now, with edX and Coursera anyways, is assessment. Because if you have 20, 30, 50, 100,000 students in a MOOC, how can you possibly assess what they know? The Coursera model right now has been heavy reliance on peer-based assessment, and that works, but quite often the assessment doesn't have the same quality most often, or let's leave it with quite often. Quite often that kind of assessment doesn't have the same quality as what you would expect from obviously a paid faculty member in a class. Even though peer-based assessment can be helpful, there are limitations to it because one of the reasons we go to a university, obviously, or we want to hear from experts, is that experts have years of thinking deeply about a topic that is more involved than what we'll see with someone who's just started to take the course. Another approach that's been increasingly relevant or of interest is the approach of using automatic grading approaches. So this is peer grading that's done through either even natural language processing, like essay grading, that can be done automated. Obviously, multiple choice types of questions can be done automated because there's a clear answer in that regard. So I think some level of automation will continue to grow in influence. So peer-based, automated. Another model that I think some systems haven't done as much with yet, but it'll be tutor-based. And this is something, say, a system like Athabasca does already, and it might be worth adopting in MOOCs, but it's that you have a number of folks who are basically paid to do assessment or of student submissions, and they then provide the students submit an assignment, and the tutors would evaluate and assess, human assessment of that assignment rather than faculty assessment. So I think those are some of the approaches that show some interesting developments so far. The signature track and the verified certificates that both Coursera and edX have started to do seem to gain a lot of attention, especially in the corporate space. So validation of learning and what people learn seems to be a huge area of interest for those individuals, but I don't think we've quite seen much innovation in that at least not as much as we're going to see as machine learning or artificial intelligence approaches become more effective at automatic grading, and as we start to look at tutor or additional models where you submit to a person and you have someone dedicated to just assessing and evaluating assignment submissions.
All right, thank you. Another question there?
Muchas gracias, George, por tu conferencia. Mi pregunta es, ¿qué papel pueden llegar a tener los MOOCs en los programas de desarrollo con los países más pobres?
She has asked in Spanish, I'm translating it. She is asking, it's another colleague, she's asking about the role, or the possible role of MOOCs in the countries, which the poor countries to develop the third world.
That's an important focus, because these regions there's some concern or has been expressed that maybe we'll start to see MOOC sort of as a colonializing activity of the Western world. I think the best way around that, obviously, is having those regions develop and produce MOOCs themselves, but quite often that's not possible because of the cost limitations. I know this last week, actually, edX just signed its first African university partner, so I know there is interest. I know of a number of Latin American countries that are developing, or at least are involved with MOOC development rather than just consuming MOOCs produced by wealthier countries. But I think this is a real concern. It's a social concern that, do people in developing regions of the world have, first of all, access to the technologies that allows them to take MOOCs provided by other systems, but more importantly, do they have the capacity to produce MOOCs that allows them to communicate to the rest of the world? Meaning that they, instead of just being MOOC takers, they should be MOOC providers, because there are things that we can learn about African agriculture, for example, from an African farmer. And rather than just having Western farmers teaching African farmers, or whatever it is, I'm just using it as an example, we need to have those localized and regional and cultural knowledge opportunities produced and shared with others. That's something that we're not doing very well currently, but we really do need to do a better job with that.
Right, thank you. Another question there?
Hi, thank you, George, for your talk. I would like to expand on the previous question. I think that one of the main problems for us who are learning environment designers or pedagogy designers is that we're always reacting to the technology and we are not looking ahead. So I think that you hinted towards some of the most important things to take into consideration in the next few years. First, I see two very important tendencies. The first one is automation. I think that we are not aware of the big change that the technology is going to make in the next few years in that aspect. There are very important research being done right now at Google and MIT and other institutions that is going to change, is going to take a huge leap forward in how we understand technology and artificial intelligence. I think that semantics and semantic analysis of human interactions by bots and machines is going to be is the next web. I mean, this is the 4.0, if you want, web. They are already implementing them in our web searches and big data analysis. And in learning, I think this is a clear tendency that we as designers are going to prepare some big models of assessment that then are going to be applied by machines. So we are working towards qualitative assessment through automation, and I think this is a very difficult thing. I think this is a critical thing. I think that, again, it can be an opportunity, but I see that the tendency is to reproduce the old automation model that dresses itself as qualitative, but it isn't really. And the next thing is pervasiveness. Internet is not going to be this closed thing, this cloud virtual space. It is going to be everywhere. It's going to be in our fridge. It's going to be in our tables. And this is going to be the way, this is going to change the way that students and learners understand their interaction. Interaction is not going to be in a virtual space, in a social network that is outside their daily lives. It's going to be very, very much integrated. And I think this is going to bring a solution to many of the problems that we're experiencing now with learner engagement. But I wanted to know your opinion on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Another colleague is asking about your opinion about two topics. The first one, automation, artificial intelligence, and its possible use for assessment, I think. And the second one, also the use of the role of the cloud and social network communication in social media and so on. That's right.
Okay. Yeah, I think both of those elements obviously are challenging to look at and to consider. So I think there's the observational end. It's worth emphasizing that where we're going to go in the future isn't going to be just MOOCs by themselves or MOOCs exclusively online. We recently had a group of folks that we convened to talk about, this is from a range of different MOOC providers. We brought a group of about, I think, 18 or 19 people together to look at what is it that we need to know about how MOOCs are impacting the traditional university. So what I mean with that is that our goal was to talk about not seeing MOOCs as something that was 100% online. You could have a MOOC layer to an existing course, sort of a blended approach or something. So some of the issues around the observational dimensions and that are certainly important and relevant there. Relating to some of the questions around social networks, I mean, there's so many concerns that are generated through social networks that are created. On the one hand, they're important to our social knowledge graph, or to creating knowledge graphs, meaning what does a student know and how can we assess what a student knows. Social networks can be very effective for helping us identify who are the important or the central people in a particular network and how can we help to improve their influence. But that also produces, from a design perspective, a way for us to look at, can we build the influence of other students who perhaps aren't as actively involved in social network learning. But anyways, I'm just trying to affirm with what the question was asking, is that there are big questions around starting to see learning as holistic and integrated. In a MOOC right now, we're treating it just as an online space, but we need to see it as being integrated to the rest of the university system and the rest of the learning opportunity as well. So at this point, I think we're about 8 minutes over the time that was allotted. If there's a final question, I can maybe answer a final question.
That's right. We have a question by mail, so I'm translating it to you. It's about the problem of paying for the accreditation for certificates. In some MOOCs, students have to pay to get their certificate. So what's your experience, your opinion?
Well, I guess this gets back to the point that I mentioned earlier about that what can you monetize? And in education, it's hard to make money off of content only because there's so much free content available. And with MOOCs, it's making it difficult to make money off of teaching. So really the third leg of the stool, content, teaching, and assessment, The third leg of the stool is the one that people are trying to make money off of. And I guess right now, I personally haven't taken a MOOC that's on a signature track for assessment, so it's not something I've looked at. Generally for myself, when we were setting up the MOOC we're doing right now, we had a choice to either charge students for it or not. We decided not to, but that was as much to do with the fact that doing a good job assessing and validating what a student knows takes time and effort. And so we were not as focused on developing that, but I think universities and educators, to have an opportunity to generate some revenue, it's understandable why they'd want to do that. One of the difficulties, though, is that those certificate and assessment models, even though it's great that there's content that's accessible and teaching that's accessible, there's a bit of a concern, I think, in that some developing regions of the world, in many ways, the people that MOOC providers say that they're most able to impact, they're the ones that aren't necessarily going to be able to afford to pay for a certificate. So it still perpetuates a bit of an inequality problem as well.
Okay, thank you. I think it was the last question.
Okay.
Then, yes?
No, I was just going to say thanks very much for your time.
We thank you very, very, very much. We know it's very hard for you. It's quite late for you. So we thank you very, very much to share your knowledge and your experience with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.